Hi, my name is Jennifer Tucker, and I believe that this video is going to be one of the most important videos that I ever film. And this is addressing the topic of healing from child abuse. Now, I know that this is not going to apply to everybody, and that's okay. But child abuse is such a prevalent problem, not only in the United States, but also all over the world, in every culture. So I believe that there are a lot of people that this will apply to. And so I feel like I've been blessed with a lot of knowledge and many realizations that have helped me to heal. Just little golden nuggets in my own healing journey. And I personally feel a sense of responsibility to share what I've learned so it can help other people, because let's be real, I know child abuse is a really difficult battle to overcome. And you know, when you grow up as a broken child because somebody else broke you, you end up an adult that has many instabilities, insecurities, destructive self-beliefs, and thinking patterns that just really need to be broken for the sake of salvaging your relationships, your work, your job, career, and just balancing out your everyday life, making it more manageable, because this is one of those things that it leaves such a lasting impact. And so I want to see what I can do to help anyone out there that this may help in repairing some of that damage that has been done to the identity and sense of self, because that's what abuse does. That's the most damaging aspect, is it damages your identity. So I've got 2 stacks of notes here, and I'm going to go over each one. I've got a process, and then more of a background, just formulative information that kind of answers the question why and how these belief patterns were developed. And then here are some tools that I believe will help to break those. And so there are so many details involved in this healing journey. There's no way I'd be able to share all of them with you right now, but I'm going to just brush over a few highlights that I believe may be beneficial. So before I get started, I just want to make a general statement that it's my intention for my YouTube channel to be a place for healing, for self-growth. I want it to be positive, and I want it to be a place of encouragement. So I don't condone any sort of antagonistic or cruel behavior of any kind. So I want to keep this a judgment-free zone. Nobody is perfect, and so we're not here to judge anyone. And this is not about waving your finger at someone and saying, I'm better than you, or I'm right and you're wrong. This is not about that. What this is about is personal growth and healing. So I want to make that clear. So I'm going to get started. So answering the question why do I think the way I think, and how do these self-beliefs come about? And so the word reaction is defined as an action performed or feeling experienced in response to a situation or event. Reactive beliefs is a little term I like to use. Are beliefs that we develop as a response to adverse circumstances. So examples would be if you think you're unlikable, and that's why you don't have any friends. That would be an example of a reactive belief. So when we are abused or neglected as children, we develop these reactive beliefs in order to make sense of the abuse or neglect. So as a child, you've got this dynamic at play that is completely illogical. Child abuse is illogical, but the mind is such an intricate computer, and the subconscious it goes into this survival mode, and it forms these beliefs out of self-protection, and it tries to make sense out of something that really does not make sense, if that makes sense. So why we do this? It's a built-in safety mechanism in the unconscious mind when you're a child. And some of us just have more trouble than others navigating away from these beliefs we've formed when they are no longer useful. So, you've got cause and effect. We are all born with a need to feel safe. Each of us was biologically programmed to seek safety by whatever means necessary. This is an involuntary survival instinct that we were all born with. So any time that our safety is threatened, this instinct then kicks in. And the need to restore the feeling of safety is so urgent that we will even resort to self-abuse, developing unhealthy beliefs and self-abusive thinking patterns and or self-destructive behaviors, if that's what it takes to become safe again. So think about it like this. You've got a house that's on fire. And so if you're standing inside of a burning house, are you going to take the time to read the ingredients on the fire extinguisher and say, is this healthy? No. Are you going to take the time to worry about water damage from flooding your house with water to put the fire out? Probably not. So, because in that moment, it really doesn't matter, the immediate need is to put the fire out. So most of us are not even going to think about it. Well, that is the survival instinct inside of us, how it works, the exact same way. It isn't going to take the time to stop and question the reactive beliefs if they're healthy or not. It's designed to carry out one function: restore our safety in that moment. If it means that we have to develop reactive beliefs that will eventually harm us, so be it. Survival says, I don't have time to think about that right now. We'll have to just deal with the consequences later when the coast is clear. One of the earliest reactive beliefs that an abused child learns is, I have to be in control. When I am not in control, horrible things happen to me. So unconsciously, in an attempt to control our circumstances in order to feel safe, we have an unconscious need to identify the cause of the adverse circumstances in an attempt to prevent those adverse circumstances from occurring in the future. It's sort of like a reverse engineering, if you will. So the driving belief behind this is, if I can control the cause of the adverse circumstances, then I can control the outcome, whether or not I'm abused or neglected. So abused children, they grow up believing, for multiple reasons, that they are the cause for the mistreatment, which we'll discuss that later. And so one of the consequences and the mechanisms at work here is repression. And repression is basically just this overwhelming feeling of restraint and an inability to share our thoughts and our feelings. We are forcefully bottling those up because to express them freely would cause adverse circumstances. So, belief patterns developed from child abuse would fall under self-abuse. And so one of the points I want to make is taking responsibility for the abuser's behavior. Why do we do it? This is a life-changing concept to understand about child abuse. When a child is raised in a volatile, abusive environment, it is safer to internalize that he or she is bad and to accept the blame for what's happening than to recognize the flaws and toxicity of the abuser. This is one of the unhealthy coping mechanisms, a shield, if you will, that children develop as a way to survive the abuse and the environment surrounding them. I'm going to actually break this down into some more bite-sized pieces. Let's take a closer look. Due to their fragile natures, small children cannot usually hide their emotions very well. And due to the abuser's fragile ego, the child is in an environment where it is not safe for him or her to have negative emotions towards his or her abuser. If the child were to direct their negative thoughts and emotions toward the abuser, which would manifest on the child's facial expressions and in their body language, it would anger the abuser and further provoke the abuser to wrath, which would be taken out on the child. So instead of the child directing their negative thoughts and emotions toward the abuser, the child learns to direct all of those negative thoughts and emotions inward, at themselves. This implosive behavior, which is caused by repressing these overwhelming emotions, marks the beginning of the developmental pattern of self-abuse. So, I wanted to just kind of share a background of how those things formulate before I get to this next part of this, which is the healing part and getting free from some of these beliefs, counterfeit truths is what I call them. So I believe that changing your life requires two things. One, it requires new knowledge. And two, implementation of that new knowledge. So, step one, acknowledge the abuse. I want to define gaslighting real quick. This is a really important point I want to kind of pause on. Wikipedia definition of gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation that seeks to sow seeds of doubt in a targeted individual, making them question their own memory, perception, and even sanity. So basically, someone who gaslights, and abusers usually do, will always remember an event differently than you remember it. And the most dangerous aspect of gaslighting during childhood abuse is the fact that children naturally trust what their parents tell them over their own intuition. So you have a dynamic of a naive child who trusts their caregiver, which is no fault of their own. And the abusive caregiver also teaches the child, reinforcing this, brainwashing them, to overwrite their own instincts and perceptions with the abusive caregiver's version of reality. It is a very dangerous situation for the child when the abusive caregiver defines their reality instead of letting them have their own reality. Because over a period of years, this is where it carries on to adulthood, this becomes a natural thinking process of the abuse victim and will create a giant foothold to attract abusers when they are an adult. It requires great effort to unlearn this process and for us to begin to trust our own thoughts, feelings, perceptions, beliefs, and instincts. So, how do we know we were abused? In order to know that we were abused, we absolutely need to be able to define what abuse is. Now, I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty details of this. There's plenty of information out there. I'll probably do more in the future, breaking down these, different behaviors, if you will. But what I want to talk about is why we need to define abuse. And I want to start with saying, not defining abuse tells the survivor two things. One, it's okay for them to be abused. And two, it's okay for them to abuse others. It is absolutely critical that we appropriately define and understand what abuse is, so that we can recognize when someone is abusing us, and so we can also avoid mistreating other people. I think a lot of us have heard an expression that goes something like this: hurting people hurt people. And so we don't want to hurt people. If you're a good person, you don't really want to hurt other people. And sometimes you don't know how to avoid doing that because of your own coping mechanisms. So that's what this is about. This is step one in reversing that behavior so that you can stop doing that. So it's kind of, a twofold tool here. So many of us who grew up in abusive homes did not have a solid basis for comparison, like those who were raised in functional homes. It may be obvious to those standing on the outside looking in that the treatment is abusive. Understand that it is not so obvious to someone who has never known any different. In fact, to someone who has not experienced much kindness, love, and affection, it may feel very awkward and uncomfortable to be treated with kindness. We may feel guilty when someone is nice to us, or mistrusting that they have ulterior motives. On the backside of this, we have an abuser who often guilt trips us anytime someone shows a normal level of concern, kindness, or generosity. And that is coming from a place of their insecurity. It threatens their perception of their reputation. How do they appear in the eyes of other people? So it's not about you. Some of you may have had experiences where the kindness or generosity of others got you in trouble with your abusive caregivers. The reactive beliefs that would have formed in your subconscious mind at that time, here's just two examples. You are not worth the kindness and generosity of others. And anytime that someone shows you kindness or generosity, you are doing something wrong. So this will cause you to put walls up and not let people be nice to you, not let them show you kindness. It'll cause intimacy issues down the road. This opens a door for a lot of relationship problems. And so that's why we want to talk about this and address it. So getting back to my point, how do we define abuse? In doing my research, I came across a description in a book I read of abuse that I was quite fond of. I'm paraphrasing here, so bear with me. The author basically stated that if the treatment is something that you would not walk up to a stranger and do, then it is probably abusive or inappropriate in some way. So most of us know it is inappropriate to approach a stranger and hit or kick them, grab them violently, or any other physical action that would threaten their safety. But I want to talk about one aspect of that specifically, and that's fear. Fear is a really big topic here, and this helps us to identify what constitutes as abusive behavior. So I believe that two key words to meditate on while trying to define abuse are inflict fear. If it inflicts fear, if it is designed to inflict fear in another individual, then it's abusive. Fear is the most normal emotion experienced during childhood abuse. So it may take a while to recognize that this is not proper or appropriate caregiving. Our caregivers were supposed to make us feel safe, not fearful. I honestly believe that our emotions are a built-in radar to help us detect when we are being treated improperly. Again, going back to the first point of gaslighting, as children, we were taught to overwrite our perceptions and feelings with what the caregiver tells us. As adults, if we want to heal from childhood abuse and break this vicious cycle, we are going to have to reverse this. This means that we need to understand that one of the weapons the abuser used against us was confusing the definition of abuse. This is one example of gaslighting. The abuser does not want you to know you're being abused, and they don't want you to be able to properly identify abuse. Otherwise, they wouldn't get away with it. Remember, abuse is all about power. And in this scenario, they have power by keeping you in the dark. So you don't know that what's happening to you is wrong. Okay? Abuse is not just a physical act. The most damaging and destructive aspect of childhood abuse that occurs is the psychological warfare that goes on. Those of us who grew up in this condition must completely relearn reality. And where do we start? We start by trusting and validating our own perceptions of what happened to us. So step 2, release guilt and responsibility for the caregiver's actions. I spoke about that a little bit in this other stack of notes. I'm going to go into it with a little more detail here. I believe one of the most powerful statements that survivors can make is the following, and I would like you to repeat after me. It is not my responsibility to protect my abuser's reputation or ego. This is how we take our power back and take power away from those who harmed us. Not submitting to blackmail to keep silent, in other words. In order to do this, we must understand that one of the most debilitating dynamics of child abuse is blackmail. As children, we were coerced into keeping silent to protect our caregiver's little secret. We learned that it was our responsibility to stay silent and protect their reputation and even their ego. If we were to dare speak up about the abuse and our treatment at home, we were subjected to guilt trips, shaming, and triangulation tactics. Many of us would be ostracized by the whole family and labeled as troublemakers. Now that we are adults, it is time to understand that speaking up was our way of crying out for help, and we did not commit any crime against our family. This point is so important to make. I'm going to state it again, and I want you to say it with me. I have committed no crime against my family by speaking up. This is another one of those statements that every survivor needs to repeat to themselves to recondition their thinking. Speaking up is not about retaliation. It's not about making someone look bad. It's about validation and healing. It's about coming out of the state of denial that we were conditioned to be in as children. You own your story. It's your story to tell. Family members will probably try to intimidate you or discourage you in multiple ways from speaking your truth. Understand that it is not because you are committing some criminal action. It is because they feel threatened by the power in your story, and it is also because they don't want to be called out and held accountable for their actions. Let me be very clear here. Functional families do not go out of their way to protect abusers. Functional families go out of their way to protect the child. If you are the victim of child abuse and your family did not protect you or even believe you, but put far more effort into silencing you, then these are most likely some psychologically toxic people, and you would do best to avoid interacting with them as much as possible. It is no doubt a sad story to tell that so many child abuse survivors have been persecuted by their whole families as a punishment for taking the blinders off and realizing and acknowledging the actual reality. The truth is the truth, whether it flatters your reputation or not. So here is another power statement that I'm going to give you. Just because someone is angry with me does not mean I have done something wrong. Why it's important to speak up. Speaking up not only gives a sense of validation to the obstacles the abuse survivor has overcome, but it also helps others who are struggling. When we begin to realize the measure of adversity we faced as children and the amount of courage that it required to do so, we begin to recognize our own strength. If you're a survivor of child abuse, you deserve a little credit. Child abuse is a terrifying monster to fight. You faced it, you survived it, and you're here to tell your story. Because you have chosen to overcome your struggle. You are being qualified with experience to recognize and help others that are facing it. The healing journey was once a wilderness that was difficult to navigate through. But because of those who had the courage to speak up about their experiences and share what they've learned in the healing process, many people now have hope that didn't before, that life doesn't end here. There is something beyond this battle. There is victory and accomplishment. So don't give up. In order to walk in that victory, we must acknowledge the real truth and let go of the counterfeit truth that we were told as children. Another statement I want survivors to say out loud: I am not guilty for what happened to me. This did not happen to you because you were a bad kid. Understand that you did not cause the abuse. You are not responsible for the actions the abuser chose to engage in. That was an old counterfeit truth that you were told as a child. So pausing right there and going back to gaslighting, gaslighting really is where one person replaces or overwrites another person's reality with what they say reality is. So you are told, I'm doing this to you because you're a bad kid. Well, the actual truth is, no, you did it because you chose to. I didn't cause you to do this. So the real truth that you need to accept is that you had a caregiver who was psychologically unhealthy and did not have the proper coping mechanisms and tools to appropriately raise a child, and they treated you poorly as a result. You are not responsible for the choices that were made by other people. Let's take a closer look at why you used to believe this. So we were on the topic of fear. I'm going to get back to that for a second. What is an abuser's number one fear? What are they afraid of? Accountability. An abuser is most likely never going to admit that their actions were wrong or abusive. They won't, most likely. Abusers are typically afraid of accountability and will dodge it by whatever means necessary. This includes blaming the victim for their actions. A large part of your responsibility as a survivor is to release that blame from yourself and place responsibility where it rightfully needs to go, on the abuser. The abuser was the one who chose to act inappropriately with you as a child, and the abuser is the one who should carry the responsibility for their actions, not you. You cannot force them to accept the blame. So don't go beating down their door thinking you're going to get an apology. That will probably backfire. You can't force them to accept the blame or responsibility or accountability for their actions, but you don't have to carry it anymore. When you accept the blame for their actions, it implies that you were in control of the situation, and that is just not the case. In other words, you did not make them abuse you. They chose to. Step 3. Make a decision to never be an abuse victim again. Perhaps the most powerful decision that you can ever make as a survivor is to never be an abuse victim again. You can't change what has already happened, but you can make a decision right now that it will never happen again because you will not allow it. This decision is the most powerful pivot point for transforming from a victim to a survivor. And it closely ties in with all of these other steps. You can't make this decision without acknowledging the abusive upbringing, without releasing the guilt and the responsibility for the abuser's actions, and taking the next step in this process, which is developing healthy boundaries. Step 4. We need to be able to identify that abuse is not the right way to treat someone. How else can we develop healthy boundaries? We need to be able to identify when someone is saying or doing something to us that is inappropriate and makes us feel uncomfortable. So my recommendation is get a notebook and write out all of the actions and behaviors that another person does or could do that would make you feel unsafe, uncomfortable, uneasy. And by doing this, you're actually creating your personal boundary list. Step 5, and this is one of the most difficult steps in the healing journey. So be forgiving with yourself. If you have to get a running start at this, I know I did. But it can be mastered, even by the shyest, most timid individuals. There's hope. So learning to communicate those boundaries. Boundaries only have power when they are spoken. We cannot expect other people to read our minds. That's not reasonable. Other people can't read your mind. They can't know you're uncomfortable with being hugged or kissed on the cheek. If you don't speak up and say, please don't do that again, it makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't like it. So it takes time for survivors of abuse to find our voices, because remember, we didn't grow up in a home where we had the freedom to say, please don't hit me, I don't like it. Please don't dig your nails into my arm, it makes me feel unsafe. That was never an option for us as children, so it takes a lot of time for us to find our voices. You have to find your voice and learn to speak up when someone violates your boundaries. This step, however, is the most critical step in preventing others from abusing us. One of the aspects that makes this so difficult is the reactions of others when we communicate our boundaries with them. Not everybody is going to react kindly. And as difficult as it may be, this is actually going to be the biggest indicator of who in our world is safe and who is unsafe. People who are safe will respect your boundaries because they have a genuine concern for your well-being. They don't want to inflict fear. A person who loves you or cares about you would not want to inflict fear or harm you in any way. They will want you to feel safe and comfortable around them and would apologize and immediately stop doing whatever it is that made you feel fearful. It is best to avoid or limit interactions with those who react negatively to your boundaries or those that disregard them. There are people that will seem agreeable to the boundaries that you communicate, but they will continue to engage in those behaviors that make you question your safety. Pay close attention to the actions of those people because many of them are abusers. So this falls into the actions speak louder than words category. There are plenty of people out there that you might communicate your boundaries like, hey, can you please not do this? It kind of triggers me, or it really bothers me when you do it. Oh yeah, okay. And then they'll continue doing it. So really, watch that. And in conclusion to all of this, please be patient with yourself and understand that all of this is a process. It is going to take time to fully implement these steps into your life. Transformation does not happen overnight, so be forgiving with yourself if it takes a while to work up the nerve to speak up. Overcoming abuse is not easy. So give yourselves some credit, pat yourselves on the back if you've made it this far. One of the most courageous decisions is deciding to be a survivor and overcomer rather than a victim. And if you're watching this, that says a lot about your decision. In the healing process, the only way out is through. In my own experience, this is just me speaking for myself, the PTSD flashbacks were my subconscious mind trying to heal itself. It's like being quizzed the same question over and over again until you finally get the answer right. So you had that fire, you put the fire out, you're no longer in the danger zone, but now we've got the floodwaters in the house to clean up that I was speaking of earlier. And that's what that is. So when we accept and embrace these truths and apply them to those memories, it transforms our perception of what happened to us. I also want to add that nobody is perfect. So every human being on this planet needs a certain margin for error. My goal is not to alienate good people with genuine concern and pure motives, but to empower survivors into validating their truth for the sake of healing and avoiding future interactions with abusers. The details for each step in the healing process are so nitty-gritty, it would take a very long time to sift through them all. These are just a few points that I know have helped me tremendously in my own healing journey, and I wanted to share them in hopes of helping anyone out there that this would be beneficial to. So my goal is to help others along the way, and that's it. So thank you so much for listening. This is Jennifer Tucker signing off.